She didn't become this version of herself overnight. The woman who loves quietly. The woman who forgives quickly. The woman who understands too much and asks for too little. The woman who gives love as if it were infinite, even when no one has ever stayed long enough to pour any of it back into her. Her story is made of moments that didn't look like heartbreak at the time. Moments where she cared more, held on longer, stayed present when everyone else drifted. She didn't notice the pattern at first. Not really. She just thought this was how life worked. People come and go, seasons change, connections fade. But deep down, she always felt the same quiet ache. Why does everyone leave right when I give them my best? She loved friends who only needed her in their storms, but forgot her the second the sky cleared. She loved family members who took her tenderness as a given, and her silence as strength. She loved people who called her important, but never prioritized her. She loved men who adored her loyalty, but never offered their own. No one stayed. Not really. Not fully. Not in the way she stayed for them. And yet, every time someone new entered her life, she opened her heart anyway. A little frightened, a little wounded, but still willing. Because loving was never the problem. It was the leaving. She knew how to show up. She knew how to listen. She knew how to care in ways that made people feel safe, understood, held. But she didn't know how to protect herself from the people who happily took that love without ever intending to stay. She gave love to friends who treated her like a temporary emotional shelter. They cried on her shoulder, unloaded their chaos into her hands, promised they would always be there, and then vanished the second their life became stable again. She gave love to family who thought her reliability meant she didn't need support of her own. She became the strong one, the mature one, the one who doesn't break, even when she broke silently every single night. She gave love to people who never said thank you, never checked if she was okay, never noticed the exhaustion behind her kindness. And she gave love to men who loved the warmth she gave them, but not the responsibility of giving warmth back. Every time she started to feel special, loved, valued, they disappeared. Not always suddenly. Sometimes gently, slowly, softly. The kind of leaving that hurts more because it pretends to be kindness. But the pattern was always the same. She gave them her heart, and they gave her their absence. She blamed herself. Of course she did. Women like her always do. She wondered if she cared too much, if she was too available, if she loved too deeply, if she overwhelmed people with the kind of emotional generosity they didn't know how to hold. But none of that was true. The truth she spent years avoiding, was that the people she loved never loved with the same depth. They loved the comfort she provided. They loved the safety she created. They loved the version of themselves they saw reflected in her kindness. But they didn't love her. Not the way she loved them. And when she realized this, when the pattern finally revealed itself with enough clarity that she couldn't explain it away anymore, something inside her cracked. Not in bitterness, not in anger, but in a kind of grief she didn't have words for. Because she wasn't mourning the people who left. She was mourning the parts of herself she kept giving to people who never intended to stay. She wasn't grieving the relationships. She was grieving the versions of herself that had hoped, even quietly, even foolishly, that this time would be different. This story is about the moment she saw the truth behind a lifetime of letting people take more than they were capable of giving. It is about the love she gave to the ones who didn't stay, and the healing that begins the day she stops blaming herself for their leaving. For most of her life, she didn't see it as a pattern. She just thought she had bad luck with people. She thought the timing was wrong. She thought life was pulling them away. She thought maybe she expected too much, or gave too deeply, or cared in ways others simply couldn't. But the truth was quieter than that. Quieter, and far more painful. The pattern wasn't in the leaving. It was in the way she kept choosing people who saw her heart and treated it like a temporary shelter. She didn't realize how often she was the one who showed up first, the one who listened without judgment, the one who gave without being asked, the one who remembered the dates, the details, the smallest things that made someone feel human. She didn't notice how easily she forgave what others would have walked away from, how often she apologized for things that weren't her fault, how quickly she lowered her expectations to match the bare minimum someone offered her. She didn't see how predictable it had become. She would meet someone, feel that spark of connection, whether friend, family, or love, and she would open up just enough to be loyal, consistent, present. And they would open up just enough to take what they needed before slowly fading out of her life. Some left loudly, some left quietly, most left gradually, the kind of leaving that hurts the most, because it pretends to be unintentional. She didn't see how often she became the emotional anchor in other people's storms, how naturally she stepped into the role of comfort, support, shoulder, listener, and how rarely anyone offered her the same place to rest. The pattern wasn't that people abandoned her. It was that she kept loving people who didn't know how to stay. She poured compassion into people who only came to her when their world was falling apart. She poured understanding into those who never tried to understand her back. She poured time and attention into relationships that were only alive because she kept breathing life into them. She didn't realize that the problem was never her ability to love. It was her belief that love meant giving endlessly without expecting anything in return. And because she expected so little, people gave her even less. She thought her patience was a virtue. She thought her empathy was strength. She thought her capacity to hold everyone else's pain was proof that she was needed, but she didn't see the cost. Not then. Not until much later. She didn't see how every "it's okay," every "don't worry about me," every "I understand," was teaching people that her love came without requirements, without boundaries, without reciprocity. She didn't see how her softness became a place people rested in, but never built with. And she never saw how every time they left, she blamed herself instead of the pattern. But patterns don't change until someone finally sees them. And one day, without warning, she finally did. Not because someone broke her, but because she realized she had been breaking herself for years by giving love to people who didn't know how to hold it. For most of her life, she didn't choose people who couldn't stay because she wanted pain. She chose them because somewhere along the way, she learned to believe that expecting more was asking for too much. Not because anyone ever said that to her directly, but because life taught her in smaller, quieter ways. She grew up being praised for being low maintenance, for not complaining, for not causing trouble, for being the child who didn't ask for anything, who didn't demand attention, who didn't express her needs unless absolutely necessary. People called her easy. People called her mature. People called her strong. No one realized those words were shaping her future. No one understood the message behind them. You're lovable because you don't need anything. And so she learned early that needing less meant disappointing less, and disappointing less meant people were more likely to stay. So she shrank her needs, softened her voice, and chose relationships where she knew she would never be a burden, because she never took up enough space to become one. She didn't think she deserved more because she rarely let herself want more. When she felt lonely, she told herself she was being dramatic. When she felt neglected, she told herself she was overreacting. When someone slowly drifted away, she told herself that was just life. She excused everyone except the one person who needed her compassion the most, herself. She thought she didn't deserve more because she had become an expert at carrying disappointment quietly. Whenever someone didn't show up for her, she forgave it immediately. Not out of generosity, but out of fear that expecting consistency would make people leave faster. Whenever someone gave her the bare minimum, she convinced herself that crumbs were still nourishment. Whenever she felt unhappy in a relationship, she told herself that wanting more was a kind of selfishness. She didn't see that other people's lack of effort wasn't a reflection of her worth. It was a reflection of their limitations. Instead, she internalized their absence as evidence that she didn't deserve presence. It wasn't that she didn't know what real love felt like. It was that she didn't believe that real love was meant for her. She thought she wasn't chosen because she wasn't enough. She thought she wasn't kept because she was easy to replace. She thought she wasn't loved fully because she wasn't lovable fully. Her heart had been conditioned to see consistency as a luxury and devotion, as something unavailable to women like her, the ones who give too much and ask for too little. But deep inside, beneath all the quiet wounds and unspoken disappointments, there was a voice she rarely listened to, the voice that whispered, "You are not hard to love." They were not capable of loving deeply. And one day, that voice would become louder than the fear that kept her small. There are women who love loudly, who demand attention, who insist on being seen, heard, held. She was not that woman. She loved quietly, in ways most people never even noticed. She gave a kind of love you don't teach, you don't learn, you don't practice. It's the kind of love that grows inside women who understand heartbreak too well and still choose tenderness. She loved without being asked to, without being encouraged to, without anyone showing her how to receive the same care back. Her love was in the details other people never thought twice about. She remembered the small things, the story someone shared offhandedly, the fear they tried to hide, the dream they whispered once and pretended to forget. Her love wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. It was stable, quiet, consistent. A kind of stability people assumed would always be there because she never made them work to keep it. She brought calm to chaos without asking for credit. She listened with her whole heart without expecting anything in return. She softened her presence to make other people feel safer, even when she needed safety the most. When someone was hurting, she felt it in her chest, as if their pain belonged to her too. When someone pulled away, she reached out instead of stepping back. When someone disappointed her, she forgave them before they apologized, if they apologized at all. Her love showed up in the things she did when no one was watching. The meals cooked in silence for family members who never thanked her. The emotional labor she carried for friends who only called when their hearts were falling apart. The patience she offered to people who never slowed down long enough to notice her exhaustion. And in relationships, her love went deeper still. She loved with a sincerity that intimidated people who were used to shallow connections. She offered devotion to men who only knew how to offer attention. She gave presence to those who only gave potential. She poured her loyalty into hands that didn't know what to do with it. She didn't give this love because she expected something in return. She gave it because it was who she was. But this kind of love, the kind that flows without being asked for, the kind that heals others while quietly wounding the giver, is the kind that often goes unprotected. Because when a woman gives love this deeply, most people mistake it for something she doesn't need herself. They forget she is human. They forget she can break. They forget she longs for the same care she offers. But the truth she would eventually discover is that even the strongest love cannot sustain itself when it is poured into people who were never meant to stay. She wasn't wrong for loving that way. She was just giving a rare kind of love to people who weren't ready or willing to hold something that pure. There is a specific kind of pain that doesn't come from betrayal or abandonment or anger. It comes from something far quieter, far more intimate, far more human. Loving people more than they ever loved her. It's the kind of pain that leaves no bruises, no evidence, no scene to replay where she can point and say, "Here, this is where it broke." Instead, it stays hidden in the empty spaces between what she gave and what she received. She never asked for too much. All she wanted was the kind of love she freely offered. Steady, honest, present. The kind of love that doesn't leave when the room gets dark or when the heart gets heavy. But the people she loved didn't love with the same depth. Not because she wasn't worthy, but because they weren't capable. Still, she felt the sting of it more deeply than she ever admitted. She felt it in the conversations she carried alone, because the other person stopped asking questions. She felt it in the messages she sent first, because they never reached out on their own. She felt it in the moments she offered comfort to people who never thought to ask how her heart was doing. And she felt it most in the silence that always followed after she had poured parts of herself that she could never get back. She gave loyalty to people who gave her convenience. She gave presents to people who gave her excuses. She gave attention to people who gave her distance. She gave effort to people who never tried. She gave pieces of her soul to people who gave her fragments of theirs. And every time someone left, she didn't just lose them. She lost the version of herself she had shaped around their absence. She carried the ache of loving more deeply than she was ever loved back. It wasn't a wound that demanded attention. It was a quiet erosion, a slow draining of her softness, a grief she couldn't name because the people she lost were never truly hers to begin with. She blamed herself for years. She thought she was the problem, that maybe she was too intense, too emotional, too loyal, too much. But she wasn't too much. She was simply giving her heart to people who weren't ready to hold something real. And deep inside, in the place she rarely touched, she felt the weight of a truth too painful to face. It hurts differently when the people you love don't know how to love you back. Not because you weren't deserving, but because they never learned what real love requires. And she, with all her tenderness, with all her patience, with all her quiet devotion, became a mirror reflecting what they lacked. Not everyone she loved was meant to stay. Not everyone she gave herself to was meant to give themselves back. But that didn't make the ache any softer. It didn't make the heartbreak any smaller. It didn't make the loneliness any quieter. It simply made her human. And this pain, the pain of loving more than she was loved, would become the very reason she finally chose to stop chasing the people who were never capable of meeting her heart where it lived. There comes a moment in every woman's life when the pain stops feeling overwhelming and starts feeling clarifying. A moment when the heartbreak doesn't explode. It settles. It lands. It becomes a truth she can finally hold without collapsing under its weight. For her, that moment didn't arrive with anger or regret. It arrived with something quieter. A kind of inner stillness that felt like the first deep breath after a lifetime of trying to earn what should have been freely given. She realized her love was never the problem. Her loyalty wasn't the problem. Her patience wasn't the problem. Her softness wasn't the problem. Her willingness to care deeply wasn't the problem. The problem was that she kept giving what she never received back in equal measure. She kept choosing people who only knew how to take. People who loved her comfort, but not her complexity. People who valued her presence, but not her heart. People who leaned on her strength, but never wondered about her wounds. And for the first time, she saw the pattern through new eyes. She hadn't been abandoned because she was unlovable. She hadn't been overlooked because she was ordinary. She hadn't been left behind because she wasn't enough. She had been pouring real love into people who could only recognize the version of her that served their needs, not the version of her that needed to be understood, chosen, held. And this realization didn't harden her. It didn't turn her cold. It didn't make her bitter. Instead, it gently pulled her back to herself. She saw how many years she spent believing she had to change to be worthy of staying. How many nights she convinced herself that caring less would protect her. How many times she softened her voice so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable with her truth. But the truth, the one she had avoided for so long, finally became impossible to ignore. She deserved a love that stayed. A love that didn't disappear when the storm passed. A love that didn't treat her heart as optional. A love that saw her not as a temporary place to heal, but as a person worthy of being held gently and fully. And the day she realized this, she felt something inside her shift. She stopped chasing people whose absence she tried to reinterpret as mystery. She stopped romanticizing inconsistency. She stopped calling hurt destiny and neglect fate. She stopped begging for the bare minimum. She stopped believing that love required her disappearance. Instead, she began to understand that real love, the kind her soul had always longed for, would never ask her to shrink, to silence herself, to prove her worth, or to carry the weight alone. Her heart wasn't broken because it was fragile. Her heart was broken because it was generous in a world full of people used to receiving and unaccustomed to giving back. And now, with clarity replacing illusion, she finally stepped into a truth that had been waiting for her all along. Her love was never the problem. She was never the problem. She was simply loving people who were never capable of loving at her depth. And knowing this, really knowing it, was the beginning of her healing. Because once a woman realizes her love is not a weakness, but a gift, she stops giving it to those who only come to visit and starts saving it for those who are willing to stay.